Hello everyone, welcome to the video, and in this video I will be showing you how to create a simple CRUD application using Spring Boot and MongoDB. So I have opened up the Spring Initializer web page. Here I have given it a package name. I have chosen Java as my language and I have chosen Java 11. Also I have added the dependencies, web dependency, MongoDB dependency and Lombok dependency. So I'll click on generate. This will generate the project, Spring Boot project. Once the project is downloaded, you can open the downloaded project in your favorite IDE. I will be opening this in IntelliJ IDEA. So I'll click open. Then I'll navigate to the downloads folder. Then I'll find the project that I just downloaded. I'll select it and I'll click open. So before starting this tutorial, I hope that you have MongoDB installed on your machine. So if not, then you can just run this command, brew tap mongodb/brew, and then you can and then this command, brew install mongodb community @5.0, and once the installation is done, you have to run this command, brew services start and MongoDB brew mongodb/-community. So this basically starts MongoDB server on your machine. So having MongoDB installed on your machine is a prerequisite for this tutorial. I will post these commands in the description below. You can just copy it from the description and run it on your machine. And also, after installing MongoDB, I would highly recommend you to install MongoDB Compass. This is basically a GUI for your MongoDB. Okay, so once you have opened up the project in your IDE, you need to navigate to application.properties files, which is inside source, main, resources, and then application.properties. Here we will specify the MongoDB host, port, and database that we are going to use. So I have MongoDB running on my local machine. So by default, MongoDB runs on 27017 port, and this is the IP address of your local machine. This will always be 127001 if you have MongoDB running on your local machine. So for database, I'll be using this YT_DB. You can give it any name. So once DB connection settings are done, you can go to this directory, and we will first create our various Java classes that we will be needing for this tutorial. So first I'll create a user class. So this will be our document, our MongoDB document. Next we will have a user repository. This will be an interface. Then we will have a user service. And finally, we will have a user controller. Next, we will declare the various fields we need in our user document. So we will go to the user class, and we will firstly annotate it with @document. And we will give it a name. So you can do that by typing collection. I'll call it users. In our user document, I'll have 4 fields. So first one will be the name. The second one will be the email, and the third one will be age. The final field that I'm going to declare is going to be the ID of the ID of the document. So this will be unique for all the entries in this collection. We will also annotate this class with @getter, @setter, @no_args constructor, @all_args constructor. So these annotations will automatically generate all the getters, setters, and all argument constructor and no argument constructor for this class. Next, we will go to our user repository and we will extend this class with Mongo repository. Now this will take two type arguments. First is the type of the document, so in our case that will be user, and the next argument is going to be the data type of ID field of the user class, so in our case that is string. So the next argument is going to be string. Next we will go to our user service and we will annotate it at @service. The user service class will have 4 methods, which will be, one will be for adding user, second will be to fetch all the users, third will be to get user by ID, fourth will be for updating users, and there will be a fifth method, delete user. So we will make each of these functions here. So this will be public, it will return a user object, add user. This will also take user as a parameter, so we will be adding this user to the database. So we will be adding it to the database by using the user repository that we just created. So we will inject the user repository here using the auto add annotation. And here we can call user repository dot save. And this save function returns us a user, so we can return this. Next will be get all users, so we will define the function. So get all users will return a list of users. We will import the Java util list package. In this again we will use the user repository to fetch all the users, so we can just do find all and we can return this. Similarly, we will define the get user by ID function. Here, instead of returning a list of user, we will return just a user, and we will rename the function to get user by ID, and this will take a ID as an input. So ID will be the string. So here instead of find all, we will do find by ID. Now this returns as an optional, so we can just we can split these two lines. We can introduce a local variable called user, and we can do if user dot is present, return user dot get, else return null. So this is giving us a suggestion, so we can just go ahead and use the shorthand. We'll define the update user function. This will also return a user object. It will take input the ID of the user that needs to be updated and also the new details of the user. So it will take ID of the user and a user object. This user object contains the new details. So first we will get the user by its ID. So we can only perform the update operation if the user exists in our DB. So we will check, we'll put a null check. So if this user is not equals to null, only then we will update the user, else we can return null from here. So we can update the fields of this user. So we can do underscore user dot set name, and then we can get name from the input user object. Similarly, we'll do it for the other two fields. Set email, set age, here as well get email, get age. And here, okay, so from here, after updating the user object, we now need to save this user object. So again we'll do user repository dot save, and we'll pass underscore user, and then we can return this. So now update user function is done. Now we'll move on to the delete user function. So again this will be a public method. Here we will return a boolean which will indicate whether the delete was successful or it failed. So we can name the function delete user, and this will take an ID of the user that needs to be deleted from the table. So we can use user repository dot delete by ID, and then we can pass the ID. So here what we can do is we can put it inside a try and catch block. So if there was an exception raised, that means the delete was unsuccessful, and we can return false. And from here we can return true. So now our service class is done. So all these methods that we have used here, save, find all, find by ID, and again delete by ID, all these methods we do not have to write it. It is being done by Spring Data Mongo. So that is generating all these methods for us. So finally we'll go to the user controller, and here we will annotate it with REST controller annotation, and we will give it a path of users. So here we will have, first we'll have the get mapping to get all the users. So we'll do public response entity, and you can call the function get all users. And here we will call our service methods that we just made here. So to call the methods of our service class, we will first inject the service class here using the auto-void annotation. And here we can do user service dot get all users. So this will be a list of users. So get all users, it can also return an empty list if there was. So we will just do if users equals null or users dot is empty, then we can return new response entity. Then we can return null and HTTP status no content. Else, if the list of users did actually have users, then we will return new response entity users and HTTP status dot OK. So this was for getting all the users. Next we will write the endpoint for getting user by user ID. So we will rename this get user by ID. This will return, instead of list of user, it will just return a user. Also the path will be /id. So we will get the ID as a path variable. So here we will use @path variable. And I'll call it string user ID. So here instead of get all users, we'll call get user by ID, and then we'll pass the user ID. And also here instead of list of users, I'll get only one single user. So get user by ID can return us null. So again we will check for null here. So instead of users, it will be user, and we can remove this. We can say no content, or if it is not equals to null, then we'll return user and HTTP status OK. Our next method will be the post mapping. This endpoint will be used to create the user. So basically adding the user to our database. So again we can do this, we can copy this and paste it here. And here we will not get any path variable, but instead we will get the request body. So we can use @request body, and our request body will be of type user. and here we will call user service dot add user, and we'll pass the user object that we receive in our request body. So this will again return us the user. So again we can put same check if this to check whether or not the save was successful. So we can call it created user, and we can copy this and paste it here, and we can put this check. And also in case of post, since this is a post API, so HTTP status should be created, and here we can return internal server error because the save was unsuccessful. Also in add user we can actually do a try and catch. And we can return null if there was an exception. So if there was an exception, created user will be null and we will send internal server error. Else created user was if user creation was successful, this will not be null and we will return the newly created user object and HTTP status of created. Then our next endpoint will be put mapping, which will be for updating the user. So again this will be a public method. This is a response entity of user, and this will be update user. Now this endpoint will have an ID as well as the request body, so it will have both path variable and request body. So in the path variable we will get the ID of the user that we want to update, and in the request body we want the new details of that particular user. So user ID and user. So here we will call user service dot update user, and we will pass the user ID and user. Now update user returns us null if update user returns us null if there was no user found with this user ID. So we can go back to our controller and we can do user updated user equals, and then we can put this check if updated user equals to null. That means we did not find any user with this ID, so we can write not found. And if there was a user and the creation was successful, then we can return the updated user details. Finally we will write our delete mapping endpoint, so that will be to delete the user. So here we can just keep response entity of HTTP status, delete user by ID, and here it will take the user ID as path variable input. Here we can call user service dot delete user, and we can pass the user ID. So since this returns as a boolean, we can put this inside an if deletion was successful, then we can return new response entity http status dot okay, else we can return internal server error. So our controller methods are done, and now we can run this application to check if our application is working as expected. Before testing it out, we forgot to add this path variable to our put mapping annotation, so we can do that. We will just copy it from here and we'll paste it here, and we'll also paste it here. So I think this should work, and let's try to run it. So we'll go to the application class and we'll click this green button. So the build was successful. It is now being deployed. So our application has started. As you can see, it has started on port 8080. So it will go to Postman, and here so our endpoint is now users, and we do not have these fields. We have name, Amit, email as amit@gmail.com, and we have age. We can specify an integer in the age field. So we can now try to hit send. Okay, so this is a get. We have to make it post because we want to save this user to our database. So actually so this get, so currently it is coming to this endpoint, get all users, and since currently our database is empty, that's why we were getting no content. So if I run the get API again, so you can see no content. So that means this endpoint is working fine. So we can also try by passing it a user ID. Say suppose this is the user ID. So if I now click send, now also I should get no content, because in our database there is no user with this user ID. So this endpoint is also working fine, which is get user by ID. Now we will test the post mapping. Okay, so the name should have been create user, but it should not matter. So here we will rename our endpoint, and then we'll change it to post, and then we will click send, and here as you can see, it is status is 201 created, and this user has been created. And here you can see that we have the ID. Now if we copy this ID and we do a get request, and we'll do get all users, so here we are getting all the users. So currently we have only one user, that's why only this user is getting displayed. And if we want to check get user by ID, I will do users slash user ID, and then I click send, and I'll get this user. So let's try by adding another user, and I'll call it Vikram, and email will also be Vikram. And we can remove this, and then we can do a send. As you can see, this one has also been created, this user. And now if I do get request, which will invoke get all users, now I will get 2 users. As you can see from the response, we have 2 users. So our get all users, get user by ID, and creating user is working fine. Now let's try the update user endpoint. So suppose I want to update this user, the user with name Amit. I want to update the email here, or suppose the age here. Actually, let's update the 3 of them. So we can copy this ID, we can paste it here, slash user ID. We can give it the name. I'll give something like John Doe, and we can update the user to Johnny Doe, and we can update the age to 42. So now if I click send, it should update the user. Okay, sorry. So this should be, so this again got so again the get user by ID endpoint got triggered, so that's why you're getting this. This should be put mapping, so put request. So we'll do send. So the user got updated. As you can see, this is the user ID, the same user ID is here. Now if I do get on this user, I should get John Doe, and also if I do get all users, I will get John Doe as the first user. Next we will try the delete user endpoint. So here we'll go and select delete, and then we'll copy this ID and we will paste it here, and then we will click on send. So as you can see, status is 200. That means this request was successful. And to check whether the delete was successful, we can just do a get of all users or get of this ID. If we do a get of this ID, then we will get no content found, because we just deleted this user. And also if we do get all users, we will get only 1 user now. As you can see, we got only 1 user. So we can also verify this change or the set of operations that we did by opening the MongoDB Compass application, which is the GUI for MongoDB. So if we refresh it, you can see the YT underscore DB database has been created, and our collection that was users that has been created. And here currently we'll see only 1 record because we deleted the John Doe user. So if I just go here and I create another user with name John Doe and I click send, the user creation was successful. If I go to MongoDB and then I hit refresh, now I'll see 2 users. So you can also verify these changes by opening your MongoDB Compass. So this was a quick tutorial on how to create CRUD APIs using CRUD endpoints using Spring Boot and MongoDB. Thanks for watching.